So, ladies and gentlemen, it is currently for me 4:38 p.m. It is the 3rd of September. It is a lovely, gloomy day over here in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and we are being joined today by Bryan of the Breathing Process. So, episode 29 of the Anatomy Podcast, we have part 3, technically, for the Breathing Process with Under the Skin of Labrynthian earlier last year with Chris. And like he kind of gave a little introduction, but we didn't get too into it just because I was like, I kind of want to save that for another podcast session if absolutely necessary. But for those of you who are not aware, as far as the Breathing Process and its lineup, Bryan is the chops. He is the drummer. He's the guy that provides absolutely the heartbeat for the songs. And I mean, he's a pretty solid guy. Had the opportunity to meet this gentleman earlier this year when they were doing the Labyrinthian Hymns tour and they came through Knoxville. Well, what can I say? Jordan, Chris, Sarah, Alex, Dan, and Bryan here. They all made me feel like another member of the band. They were really welcoming. And then, of course, Warm Shepherd was just as welcoming, if not more, because of our contributions over at Sean Cross to Druid House as a Facebook community, which is steadily growing now. That's super cool to see. But like I said tonight, we are being joined by Bryan. We're going to be telling the entirety of his story as a musician, basically even promote things he has going on outside of music, because it would be impossible these days to just be a musician. Some of them are barbers, some of them are tattoo artists, some of them are in real estate, like Adam Easterling of Orthodox now 2 or 3 episodes ago now, which is crazy to think about. And shout out to him because it was an awesome opportunity to host him. But you guys get the point. Here on the Anatomy Podcast, we have the formula that we usually utilize, in which the first half is for the people. The second half is more or less, how did you get into the band? And like, what does the band mean to you and all that fun stuff? So how are you doing today, Bryan?
I'm doing well, man. I'm actually kind of getting over a little bit of a chest cold or I got some kind of funk going on. Had a rough couple of nights, but today I feel a lot better, so that's good.
Yeah, that's nothing but awesome, because that means that, well, you won't be so incredibly miserable and bored while it's being here on the podcast. If anything, just a little bit, and that's completely okay. Or at least I like to think so. So right off the bat, basically, this is we like on the Anatomy Podcast to utilize it as a marketing engine per se, to promote music, to promote albums and EPs, kind of push content even months after a bigger project, a bigger release has been unveiled. But we also on the podcast, like I said, we really like to think of it as a documentary podcast as well. So while we have you here tonight, Bryan, basically give us a kind of summary introduction to who you are, and basically we'll get into all the juicy details of your musical legacy a little bit afterwards.
Sure. So yeah, as you said, my name's Bryan. I'm from West Virginia, born and raised. I've been into music since as long as I can remember. That was always one of the things I wanted to do when I was younger, was start some sort of, if not even music, just some sort of, I wanted to be like an entertainer, performer, I guess. And I always leaned towards music. And I'd say when I was about 11 or 12, I started visiting my biological father a lot more, and he was into a lot of metal, rock, and stuff like that. And he kind of played bass like with his friends, just as a hobbyist. He was never really. I think he played guitar back in high school and when he was younger. And I just remember, I think it was kind of unprovoked. I just picked his bass up one day and started noodling around, and I think he might have showed me a couple riffs or something like that, and that's actually what I started out on, was playing bass. And then So all the other kids in my neighborhood got electric guitars, and my thoughts at the time were, nobody plays bass. I'll be, the the desired bass player that everybody needs. And literally the first day, my friend who was my neighbor up the road, his family still lives up the road from me actually. Um, the day that he got his guitar, the first moment I played it and heard that distortion and the heaviness, I was like, "Fuck bass! Bass is stupid." So I played guitar way before I ever started playing drums. I started playing drums out of necessity. Well, actually, when I was maybe 16 or 17, I started playing with a guy that I went to school with. I think one day, like during school, we both noticed we had like Slayer T-shirts on. We're like, "Oh shit, what's that?"
Mhm.
And somehow we got linked up. And uh, the reason I even took an interest in drums at all was because he would jam here at my house, and he would leave his drum set, and I would kind of, after he would leave, I would kind of sneak and play them. And definitely, had no direction or really even any plans of becoming a drummer. It was just kind of something I always wanted to do. And I think when I was, even before that, I think my dad had like bought a really shitty drum set, and me and my friends would kind of beat around on it, but it was never anything that I was definitely obsessed with guitar for those, first few years of my musical adolescence or whatever. But so when I was, I think around 16 is when I started, maybe 15, 16 is when I started kind of realizing like, well, shit, I can actually like keep a beat, and I'm starting to figure this out a little bit. And I think when I was 16, I got my first drum set, and it was a piece of shit. I got ripped off big time. Oh shit, sorry.
You're good.
Lost it for a second. But yeah, it was like I don't even remember what it was. It was just like this piece of shit that was stacked up in the corner. It was like a friend of mine's dad's, and it was awesome for me, at the time. And I used that for a while, and again, I still wasn't really planning on like trying to be in any bands or anything. I always wanted to play guitar in a band, and I still haven't done that actually.
Huh.
So when I was 16, maybe going on 17-ish, somewhere around there, I don't know. Time means nothing, especially after the whole quarantine thing. My concept of time and how many years it's been, it's completely in shambles. But
Yeah,
we'll
absolutely.
say 16 is when I joined my first band as a drummer, and that was because a friend of mine who actually I grew up playing guitar with started like a rock band, kind of in hopes that it would be a little more easy to commercialize versus the thrash metal we've been playing in our
Right.
bedrooms for. So I did that just kind of like I said, out of necessity. I didn't really want to be a drummer. I didn't want to play that kind of music, but I could play drums. I had a drum set, and they basically were like, "Listen, you're the drummer now." And that's kind of how it went for a few years. And then I think when I was like 17 or 18, I didn't own a drum set. I think I'd sold whatever beater drum set I was using, and I somebody reached out to me. There was like a local band that needed a drummer, and I actually went to high school with the guy that was drumming for them. So I was like, what's the use of checking it out if I don't have a drum set? But for
Right.
some reason, I decided to give one of the guys a call, and they were so happy to even hear from a drummer in our area that they were like, "No, it's fine, man. We got a drum set for you to use." So that was the first band I ever like played shows with, and it was metal. It was kind of like more Black Label Society, Ozzy Osbourne, which was
Yeah.
awesome, but it wasn't really what I was looking for as a 17-year-old. I want to go fast. I
Yeah.
wanted endless double bass and all that. So I don't know. I jumped around from band to band for a number of years, and I've been in some bands, not too many worth mentioning, but you know, I bounced around for a while, and played in a lot of bands that were kind of close to what I was wanting to do, but I always settled, you know what I mean? Because I'm from West Virginia, the middle of nowhere, and
Yeah.
there's slim pickings when it comes to musicians, bands. There's a lot of people that play, but as far as people that are skilled and disciplined enough to get together on somewhat of a schedule and write music.
Right.
That it was very, very, I had to
Seldom.
settle.
Yeah.
Had to settle a lot, and I played in some like metalcore bands with clean singing, like really kind of emo stuff that I hated, but I was like, I could still do some double bass here and there, it's cool. But no, it was a lot of fun. It was definitely those bands were like the platform for I guess what I'm doing now. They were like the foundation. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't really do anything too notable for a while until my adulthood, I guess. And I want to say this has been like probably 7 or 8 years ago, maybe even more. Funny enough, the singer for Morbid Angel actually lives in West Virginia, like 40 minutes from me.
Huh.
Which was like a rumor I always heard before I met the guy, and was like, "There's no way that guy lives in Parkersburg." There's why, And then eventually, a friend of mine that works at the music store in Parkersburg put me in touch with him. And honestly, when he first reached out to me, I was like, "What is this? Does this guy like want me to help him find weed or something? Like, what does he want from me?" And he was looking for a drummer for his solo project, which is called Warfather. So that was like the first, I guess, cool music opportunity that I got, because I got to go meet Eric Rattan in Florida, got to record at Mana Studios on the Hate Eternal drum set. So I felt about this big in that room around those guys. I felt like a seed.
Yeah, naturally. I mean, yeah. in the same room with the guy from Morbid Angel,
yeah.
That's actually pretty crazy. And by no means do I personally listen to Morbid Angel or even Slayer that much anymore. Slayer was really a gateway band alongside bands like Slipknot, Nine Inch Nails, and Marilyn Manson. And then that immediately just like projected me into this whole new arena, this whole new stadium of various like what I call now, which is horror show music, which is just like kind of spooky Halloween, gritty music, Slipknot, like a lot of new metal. But like that's still such an awesome experience, I'm sure. And like looking back on it, you're like, holy shit, I was in the same room with the guy, and he was like, I want you to be my drummer. And you're like, why? Or something like that, something along those lines.
And again, it's not necessarily that I was like the most skilled. It's just like I said, in West Virginia, there's very few musicians to pick from. So I think there was maybe like 2 guys around here that auditioned for that before I did, and it was just one of the guys was actually a friend of mine who was a guitar player that kind of plays drums. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't like a huge epic contest that I had to win or anything like that. It was just like, well, you're one of the 3 guys around here that's decent enough. I think this will work,
Yeah, no,
I mean, we meshed really well. Like the first time we jammed, like it was a good, we clicked, and I grew up on thrash, old school death metal. I mean, I've went through like every phase of music possible. Especially in my earlier years before I even played music, I listened to just about everything.
Yeah.
But middle school is when I kind of started getting into like Metallica, Slayer, and then it just kind of got harder and harder. Cannibal Corpse, and so on.
Exactly.
In the slash double bass forever.
Double bass forever. I'm completely with that. And it's funny because like just speaking on behalf of other drummers that I've had on the podcast and other people who are aware of that, or for example, shout out to Dave Rucky of Sentinels, New Jersey, and his podcast, the Six Stroke Podcast. Like drummers are always the hardest thing to find. So especially in your situation when you were one among 3 in the area, period. It's like, yeah, I'm sure nonetheless, it was like, wow, this is actually a pretty cool start. So whilst you're working alongside the singer of Morbid Angel with this project called the Warfather, let's go ahead and continue from there. Like, this is a very awesome story so far. Like, what was going on with Warfather, man?
So when I met Steve, he had David Vincent, which is like the original Morbid Angel vocalist, who
Mm,
I think he had maybe left and came back a time or two or something like that. Maybe not. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. But anyways, when I met Steve, he had actually just rejoined Morbid Angel, and that was before whatever the last record was. It's escaping me right now. But yeah, so when we started writing, or when I started learning and writing the drums for the Warfather stuff, he was also getting prepared to go back on tour, or to write the record and go on tour with Morbid Angel. I think it was maybe like a year from that point is when they started really getting busy.
mm,
So it was never really like I mean, we had planned on playing some shows and doing some things and maybe making another record after that one. But it was never really going to be his main project, or at least that's kind of how I took it.
yeah.
And so I for me it was like, okay, I get to go to this badass studio, meet all these awesome legends of death metal that I've grown up listening to. So it was more just like a really fun experience. And we did play one show in Virginia Beach in the middle of the winter. It was freezing, which was crazy.
Ooh.
And yeah, that was it. It was actually filmed too. It was a show that was put on by Black Star Guitars, I think.
Okay.
And it was supposed to be filmed, and I've yet to ever see any videos of that show or hear anything else about it. So somewhere floating in the ether, there are live videos of Warfather with me on drums, somewhere on some hard drive, maybe, or maybe they're gone by now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Who
So yeah,
knows?
that's really all we did. Was we did that show, and then by the time the Warfather album came out, he was like head first, back into Morbid Angel.
Yeah.
And yeah, so from there I just kind of bounced around with some local bands, and then I don't know how, it was probably 3 or 4 years later, maybe something like that, when I got hooked up with the Breathing Process. And like I said, I did some things in between, but this is actually a crazy story. So I was in a deathcore band. I don't even remember the name of the band or who was in the band. I vaguely remember this. I vaguely remember this one show we played. It was like an abandoned school. It was a really cool place to play a show. Honestly, it was like in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
and it was an abandoned school. And we played in the cafeteria. There was like graffiti all over the walls and floor. It was pretty cool. But I played that one show, and I think that was one of the only shows I played with whatever band I was in at the time. And
Okay.
so, and this was before Warfather. This was like still in my early 20s or whatever. And apparently Cody, the vocalist that was in the Breathing Process when I first joined, he was at that show in another band, and I guess he remembered me somehow. And that's how I actually ended up in the Breathing Process. Is he found me through the singer, whoever the singer was of the, this is getting confusing. He found me through the singer of the band that I was in at the time, and like
Yes.
found me on Facebook, sent me a message. He was like, "Hey man, I'm pretty sure you're this drummer that I saw, randomly years ago. Like it was like 6 years ago or something like that."
Yeah.
And yeah, and he sent me some videos, and I actually learned I think like 9 of their songs before I even came to my first rehearsal. And that's how I ended up in the Breathing Process. Was he saw me in some random abandoned school like 6 years before. Was like, "Oh, that guy's pretty decent." And
Yeah.
I think at that point they had been kind of on a hiatus. Not, I mean, they were still writing, but I don't think they had a drummer for, it was like going on 5 years. They
Really?
didn't have a, yeah, something like that.
Wow. No, that's
Yeah,
that's problematic. When you
yeah, but it's just kind of funny that he somehow remembered me and was like, "Oh, I remember that guy's name that was singing for that band," and he like dug through
yeah,
Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and
fine-tooth combed through social
yeah, yeah,
media to find you, my guy. That's
yeah,
that's that's crazy to think about. And that's the thing too, is it used to be like that all the time. And I know it used to be like that all the time. Just like how much more difficult it was to get interlocked and get
yeah,
connected with all of your fellow musicians in the scene. And then on
sure,
top of that, like when you're in a place that's a little bit more let's see, primitive, right?
yeah,
More challenging than say a desert, being Arizona. You got the weather and everything too, that can easily just cause a whole bunch of obstacles and complications. But thinking back on that last show that you did with that deathcore band, like just the imagery in my head thinking of where you guys played in an abandoned school, like that sounds like the coolest thing ever. And a
It
part of
was pretty
me,
cool.
yeah, a part of me kind of wishes sometimes that um for example, if like I get, and this is like a very, very naive thing to say, and I'm gonna disclaim that right now. Um, but like just imagine how much cooler it would be if half the concerts you went to were in kind of very gently repurposed abandoned properties, I guess. Like how much more metal that would be. But
Yeah,
also got to keep in mind like, hey, it's kind of private property. Like
sure.
you got
Yeah.
to figure that out with the owner, and obviously they did that time, but that's kind of like the dream. That really is the dream, is to be able to play in a place like that. But with your entry into the breathing process, Cody, like fine tooth combed through the internet for you, found you. And I mean, let's see, Samsara, that was
Mhm.
the last album with him on it. And that
Yeah,
was back in 2018, right?
that sounds right. Yeah, I think I joined
2018,
in
2017.
the end of 2017. Maybe is when I started talking to
Oh
them,
shit.
something like that. Maybe I don't know, that could be. Like I said, I have no concept of time anymore, so it could have
Time
been
is
3 years,
irrelevant.
maybe 5 years. I feel like I've been in the band for maybe a little over 5 years, so that would have
Yeah.
been 2017-ish, yeah, something like that.
2017, right. Damn good year. Damn good year. And that was
Yeah, a
still when
lot
I
of
was like in high
here.
school and shit, which is crazy to think about. Like those were definitely different times. And like now that I think about it, just even thinking about and referencing the pop culture and stuff, 2017 was like a couple years before Infinity War came out. And I remember just like how different things were and how like exciting things were. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is my future gonna be? And I think I look to now and I'm like, well, it's better than it could have been, but we're off
Yeah,
to
we
a
didn't
rough
know how good
start.
we had it before the pandemic. We really took everybody
Yeah.
took life for granted, you know.
They really did. And then like one wrong serving of bat soup destroyed the world. Like
Yeah,
not to make fun of it or anything, but you
sure.
gotta also make fun of it a little bit. That way it's not too serious.
It's like so bizarre and wild that you almost just have to laugh at how insane it really is. Like
Yeah.
it is.
The
I get you.
the numbers, Mason. The numbers, what do they mean? Fucking death. Like but no,
Exactly.
that's actually super cool. And thus far, I mean, of course, we're learning such an incredible story. And now people like an actual fucking interviewer, I write down this shit. I take notes. That way we can recap, go back in time a little bit, and just keep on bouncing back and forth until there's a little friction, a little heat. Um, so like kind of recapping, there's an audio cue. um your dad got you into music, and I'm sure from the impression I got, it's like beforehand you weren't really hanging out with him or something, and then you're like, okay, let's give it a shot, and then
No, yeah, like so my parents were really young when they had me and they were separated before I was born. I think
mm,
my dad was like 19 when I was born, 18, 19, and my
mm,
mom would have been a couple years older than that. And that's the thing about my mom. I still like she's one of those women that like perpetually lies about her age. And I've tried to do the math, so I never really know how old my mom is, like because she lied about her age for about 5 years. But anyways, I think she was maybe she's like 2 or 3 years older than him, so they were young when they had me, and like I said, they were already separated, so there was a lot of you know tension, whatnot.
mm,
They were kids, and she was, I don't know if she was married by the time I was born to my then stepdad, but she was with him when I was very young. And for a number of years, I kind of thought he was my dad, sort of. Like I knew about my dad, but it was, I was young and I didn't know what the hell was going on.
right.
But no, I didn't actually. And this is weird because my dad's always lived in the same town as me, and we would like see each other all the time in passing. And he was
Really?
always, yeah, he would always try to reach out, but without giving too much away of my family history, there was just
Yeah, of course.
a lot of bitterness, and we missed out on a lot of years. So when I was a teenager, I was probably 14 or 15 when I started kind of, I don't want to say like, I don't know, I kind of was more aware of the full situation going on and had less disdain or less of a bad taste in my mouth from my dad,
Loathing. Yeah.
discovering how things actually went down. And actually his and our relationship flourished there for a while, because I kind of got to a point where I was like, man, I don't have to be angry or upset with my dad anymore. I can just like, he's just my dad now, and it was kind of it was a pretty liberating thing for me, because I went so long thinking things were a certain way. And then, as I got older, I started to see the pieces kind of fit together. And it's like, shit, he's not a terrible person. But
Right.
yeah, so when we first started hanging out a lot more, we made up for a lot of lost time. He actually got me into skateboarding for a little while, and I was already kind of into like, stuff like that, like as kids do, rollerblading, skateboarding, bicycles,
Absolutely. Yeah.
whatnot. And he got me my first really, really nice skateboard, like took me to an actual skate shop and got me my first, because like before that I was skating around on like Walmart skateboards, and I was like, this is the best skateboard there is. What are you talking about? I got this at Walmart. And then he's like, no, we're gonna get you trucks, wheels, bearings, like everything from the ground up. And that kind of took over for a while. And somewhere in those number of years is when I started getting into music. And as the years rolled on, it was kind of clear that was what my main focus was.
Right.
So I kind of, abandoned the skateboards, abandoned the BMX, all that, and just hyper focused on learning Metallica riffs alone in my garage.
Absolutely, man. And like, just to let you know, by no means was I like trying to pry or anything, but more or less just like recapping on questions and stuff. So all apologies if there was any discomfort.
No, it's all good. I'm pretty open about it. I just
the fine details.
Yeah. Use my
Yeah.
words carefully so not to upset anyone, I guess,
Absolutely.
make it seem like I'm pointing any fingers or anything like that,
Right.
I
Absolutely.
had a great upbringing. I have nothing to really complain about. I didn't have like I dealt with some turmoil as far as like parents not getting along, but I don't have anything to complain about. I had a good upbringing,
Good. No, that's always good. That's always something to be grateful for, and just just enjoy about life, because plenty of people, they don't really have a good relationships with their parents. So when it came to you and your dad starting to hang out again a lot more, he introduced you to playing bass guitar, and would you say he like really was the reason that you got into music in general, or was it the reason that you got into playing instruments and stuff?
So he never really tried to necessarily get me to play or push me towards that. He just kind of, as himself, as a hobbyist, he would have his instruments laying around. And I was interested in music. Like I said, from like an early age, I wanted to do something like that. Whatever that was, I had no idea what that might be at the time, but yeah. So I don't think before I picked the bass up on my own, I don't think he actually tried getting me to play it. He might have, in passing or something, but I don't really recall him ever trying to get me to go down that path. And I think it was I think like I just started picking it up and messing around and sounding horrible for a while. And
everybody does.
I think it eventually got to the point where he kind of heard that I was taking the initiative to try and learn stuff, to try and learn a little bit. So he showed me a couple things that he knew, and it just kind of spiraled from there. And as I said earlier, I got my first bass, and that was when all my buddies were getting guitars, and my bass playing lasted for as long as until I heard that first distorted Ibanez through a shitty line 6 or whatever it was at the time. I was like, damn, bass is stupid. I want this. I want distortion.
Bryan says, I'm not about the twang, I'm about the chug.
Yeah. I mean, I was a child, so I was just like, like starting out, because you can never find, like even today, like bass players are really hard to find, especially solid ones. So in my mind, like I'll be the bass player that everybody wants, because there are none, but then It's like, no, I'm just going to be another dime a dozen guitar player. Fuck it.
So, yeah, continuing to kind of do a little overview and stuff before I decide to pick your brain about something a little bit more specific as far as just music enthusiasm is concerned.
Yeah.
So your friends really got you into you would say just by bouncing around in the almost the mindset of, oh, if I learn how to play, then I can apply myself to these different things going on, these different
Yeah,
projects, like
exactly.
bouncing
I thought
around.
that, even if it was a band that I wasn't 100% the sound that I was going for, I felt like that was better keeping the gears greased, keeping active rather than just continuing to play by myself.
Exactly. And just applying yourself to the craft. Because after all, to really create a career and a resume, you got to start plucking things and like just like boom, boom,
Sure.
boom. I've been in all these different shitty projects, but projects nonetheless. I've done the
Yeah.
paperwork, I've filled out the application. Where's my more serious band? Like, come on, bring it, bring it. So you were mentioning too that when it came to getting into drums,
Mhm.
that was about like 16 or you know what? Let's see.
I'm
Okay,
gonna
so
say
you're
15 because 16, I think my 16th birthday, I used that money to buy my first drum set.
yeah, to
So
buy your better
that,
drum
I
set.
was like, okay, all these people want me to fill in for their bands or do this and that. Like, I'll get a drum set, and I
Right.
will officially be a drummer, I guess.
Yeah,
Before that, it
exactly.
was just like, I'll do this if you want me to, because I
Yeah,
can. So
exactly. And
I didn't
so
really have any
far,
passion for drums for a while, and even like playing in bands, like that first band that I was in that played a lot of shows. We played a ton, and it was I don't think it was until we played a show with a band that was like a lot heavier than us that I noticed for the first time. I was like, holy shit, this drummer is sick, and he's better than me, and I don't like that. So that,
fuck that guy.
I mean, it wasn't like a negative thing. It was just like,
No.
I don't want to be the worst drummer at the show anymore. Like, I want to, and that's like what got me into the more extreme side of drumming.
Yeah, it was your driving force to continue ascending as a drummer and as a
Yeah,
musician.
yeah. Started
Now,
with Slayer, trying to learn like all those double bass parts, and then it was like that was even before I even knew what a blast beat was.
mm,
And I don't even know when I started. It was probably Cannibal Corpse. The bleeding is it's probably the one that got me into the fucking relentless pounding of
yeah,
the snare.
no, seriously. And that's always really cool. By chance, do you remember the name of the band, the heavier death metal band that you were like, I must ascend? Like,
No, I don't, man. It was a local band that we played with in, I want to say it was in Huntington, West Virginia, and dude, it's been so. I was literally like a teenager, and
yeah,
I don't like, especially back then, like bands didn't stick around for long. They would come out, play some shows for about a year,
no, they
maybe
didn't.
do an album or a couple EPs, and then gone.
Yeah, with the wind. Oh,
So I don't
yours
even.
dust in the wind.
The only way I would be able to find out who they were is if somehow I could dig up like a flyer or something from that show, which I don't even know where
Yeah,
to
which
start.
might be nigh impossible, but
Yeah.
absolutely shout out to any of those bands. Like, if any of the members of those former projects happen to listen to this podcast when we push it out, like, dude, reach out to Bryan, man, and like kind of like, dude, I would be more than happy to hear like that little part of the story, even in the comment section below this episode per se, because it'll be on YouTube first, really. So like, yeah, you were playing and you were opening for this heavier death metal band, and that's really what drove you to continue ascending as a drummer, and not in a, oh, fuck this guy, he's like,
Yeah, yeah,
he's better than me. It's like, no, you're just like, you were inspired. You were
yeah,
inspired to continue moving forward. And what I think is super cool, thanks to another local project that was just happening at the time. And, they might have been dust in the wind after that, but nonetheless, they were there. And it was almost like a phantom moment now
yeah.
looking back on it, because you're like, whoa, where did they go? Just like
Right.
the layers of mystery going on there is super cool. And that's like perfect, I would say, for a narrative of any kind. But
I think at the time I'd been playing drums for like maybe 2 years or something like that.
yeah,
So that guy was the first drummer that I was like, I need to talk to this guy and find out everything. Like, I remember asking him how long he'd been playing, and he was like, "Oh, dude, 11 years and some change," you know. So I was like, "That's it. That's it. I
yeah,
just need to sit here and grind it out." And
yeah.
and I've kind of like in the back of my mind as the years have went on, I've thought about that like until I finally like, okay, I've been playing longer than 11 years now. Like, you know,
No,
kind of,
that's seriously a mile marker. And even
yeah,
back then, you're like maybe a quarter or halfway through. You're like, okay, that's it. I'm halfway there. Just kind of you gotta continue trucking, man. And
I
eventually
think
you'll
just that guy really put it into perspective for me because at that point we'd been playing with a lot of other local bands where I feel like a lot of the drummers were like in my situation. It's like I'm not really a drummer, but I'll feel like it's like bare minimum type thing.
yeah,
So that was the first time I was like, oh shit, this guy's doing stuff that I've like heard on records that it's like I knew it existed, but like seeing it in person and actually seeing like a local person that like makes you turn your head was like, oh
yeah.
shit, this is okay. They're out there. Like this is
Like
real.
bing. They're
Yeah, yeah,
important mile marker right there. It's just the
yeah,
guy
absolutely. And I
guy
wish
guiding
I,
in the plane as he's descending.
yeah, I wish I knew the band because that would be cool to like somehow in a full circle type way, like reach out to that guy and be like, hey man, you remember that little kid that was like, hey man, how long you been playing drums?
Yeah, exactly. Just reaching out. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is your opportunity to just reach out into the ether, the local music community of West Virginia, and say, hey, man, I think I've made it. And I wanted to thank you, like that type of thing. And that's also what makes a podcast like this super cool is
Yeah,
whether it's just high
apps like that.
grade, yeah, like high grade professional, just like actually me traveling out to West Virginia in person to talk with you and the rest of the guys concerning this. It's like, at least with this, you have opportunities like this to kind of just reach out and be like, hey, I've made it, man. Or at least I feel like I've made it compared to before. That's what it's all about, man. That's what it's all about. And it is a pleasure to kind of host that little moment right there. Um, but
Yeah, man, you're making me think about things I haven't thought about in a long time, and it's cool to remember
there
some
you
of
go.
the early days.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it's about is just the history of every musician that I get on here, period. And like just pretend I'm David Attenborough. Just how long have you been a drummer? Like, you know, 11 years and counting. Like
Yeah.
that type of thing. It's fun. It's great. So, what would you think was your like something that you carried in your transition from thrash metal in the bands in the projects you were playing when you converted, I would say, over to death metal? Like, what were some of the things you kind of plucked from thrash? Not even just as a drummer, but as a musician.
I mean, as you know, thrash is like all about the ultimate speed. So it definitely. I mean, I played along to Slayer songs poorly for years, but it eventually tightened up, and it definitely was a huge brick in the foundation of my playing for sure. Like Dave Lombardo, still to this day, I think I steal some of his style when I do fills and stuff like that. Just the endless tom fills. Of course he's
Yeah.
got than I do, but yeah, I mean, I definitely keep a piece of all that with me. Maybe not consciously, but subconsciously for sure. It's definitely in there.
It's instinct.
And
It's muscle
I
memory,
can
man.
I can notice it a lot more like if I'm recording something and I sit back and it's like, oh, that kind of sounds like I wasn't really going for that, but I can kind of hear the influence, whatever.
Exactly. And that's really what's cool about writing music in general, man. That's just all part of the experience. And just plucking the musical inspirations from all of the bands prior that you inspired to. You're bringing it full circle. You're kind of like throwing all the ingredients in the pot and stirring like a witch, just and there you go. Like that's that's your drumming style, man. And that's what's really cool about like actually being a musician and an instrumentalist, but also just an artist in general, just learning the craft and harnessing it. So with your last kind of stage that you were mentioning before we ended up doing full circle and just infinity going on right now. So you joined a metal band, you had a better set, you played in the abandoned school and everything like that. And then
Mm.
Cody ended up reaching out to you, and you ended up
Years
jumping
later,
in
yeah.
to, yeah, years later, into the breathing process.
Mm.
And I guess, do you like kind of still stay in touch with the West Virginia music scene? Like, do you see all the little hidden diamonds in the rough and you're like, yeah, they're doing some cool shit. They're doing what we're doing. You're like talking with Jordan and Dan and everybody. You're like, you know what? These guys, this is what we were doing at the beginning, bro. This is what we were doing with Sam, Sarah, and all of our previous shit. And, you know, this is what led us to our moment, and now they're on their way up too. Like, have you had that kind of moment yet?
Um, Honestly, there's sadly there's not a whole lot of heavy music. There's a lot of underground heavy music that's like that I'm kind of discovering here and there. And oddly enough, there's a lot of heavy bands in Beckley, which is a couple hours from me, but it's like middle of nowhere, like lots, bad drug problem, things like that. But there's like
Oh,
there's these like little pools of these scenes that, you know, they're thriving in their little areas. And it's like, 20 miles this way, like nobody knows that it's going on. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I play for another band, a local band, and we played a show in Beckley. It was a house show in a basement, and the it was insane. Like there was like the amount of people and the energy, and it really blew me away being in such a nowhere, drug infested area like that. There's like all this life, and it was really cool. But in Morgantown, there seems to be like more of a metal scene. There's actually a band, I think they're called Scare Tape, that I've been getting into. That's they're younger guys, and we're actually trying to book them on a show in Ravenswood, I believe. But
That is
uh,
such a cool name. Is that a town, or like, is that a county? Like, what is Ravenswood? That sounds so
that's
cool.
yeah,
Damn, dude. I wish I lived in a city called Ravenswood. That's so freaking cool. Um,
it, it sounds cooler than the name's cooler than the town.
mm, is it? Yeah, definitely. It definitely sounds older. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, but I mean, I also am all about like kind of vintage towns, as long as they're not actually in the background infested by like occultic theatic Satanists that are like, okay, and you know, or maybe like an Amish community or some shit, and they're actually, you know, demonic cult or whatever. You know, I've been watching way too many horror movies recently.
we've got some cool historical buildings, and supposedly George Washington had some land and some houses here. There's like a Washington Street, and uh, I've I've heard like millions of stories of where the names came from, and you have half of Ravenswood that says like, "Oh, Washington never stepped foot here. That's all BS," and then you have everyone that's like, "No, he lived here," So it's just kind of a fun local folklore thing, I guess.
Mm.
I think I actually looked it up at one point, and I didn't find any evidence that he ever stepped foot here. But it's just one of those like local legends that people continue to believe and perpetuate. So
No, that's always fun to have lore though in a town like that. And as long as they don't actually go to Civil War like Washington was here, no, he wasn't, and you're like, and they're all in the town square and shit going at it. Like, as long as it doesn't get to that point, it is just a fun little tale. It's a fun little piece of American history.
yeah,
But with that being said, we've covered quite a bit of your story so far, which is super cool.
yeah, we're
And I
kind of
do,
sporadic with my storytelling. It's
yeah,
hard to it's hard to hone in on one area. When I start
yeah.
telling one story, it reminds me of other things, and get a little scattered.
Absolutely. No, you're good, man. You're good. Nonetheless, it is a story. I mean, after all, sometimes in books, you have so many different time jumps happening, or you have perspective changes.
Reading
It's
here
the same
earlier.
thing. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. But with that in mind, I would want to ask, and I would want to briefly pluck off of you 5 albums that you would contribute to what you do for the breathing process, or just what you love as a musician. Only
I mean,
5.
see, I always get asked like who my favorite drummer is or this and that, and it's hard for me to narrow it down. I mean, as far as like I mean, a name that pops up immediately is Shannon Lucas, Black Dahlia Murder. That was the first band that I ever listened to. See, when I first discovered the Black Dahlia Murder, I was convinced that they had two singers because at the time, all the death metal or like heavy, growling, whatever that I'd heard was kind of like one tone. Like even like Chris Barnes, like in his when he was good or
Yeah.
better. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna diss him too hard, but the last 6 feet under questionable. But yeah, before I listened to Black Dahlia, I kind of listened to stuff like Cannibal Corpse, Obituary. It was all kind of like just the low, mid-range kind of vocal. So when I heard Black Dahlia for the first time, I did not believe that it was one person. I was like, there's no fucking way he's doing those lows and those highs. There's no way. That's got to be two dudes. And that was definitely the band that like made me notice like, oh shit, there's like a whole other world. Like there's a whole other world of crazy talent and skill and insanity. Because, to be honest, a lot of, especially like the old school death metal, as awesome and as important as it is, listening to it with like today's standards of sound and whatnot, it's kind of a lot of it's sloppy and recordings are rough, which I love that personally.
Yeah. It's
It's
more organic.
it's a good aesthetic for certain things, but
Yeah.
yeah, Black Dahlia was one of the first like heavy bands that I was like, holy shit, these guys are crazy tight and precise, and like this is insane. So yeah, Shannon Lucas, 100% is definitely, as far as like fast double bass blast beats go, he's like in the top three as far as my influences.
But
And oddly enough, I really because like I said, earlier, I was sort of into like skateboarding and stuff like that, which kind of segued into when like Jackass and like stuff like that was getting popular. So like we were always me and my friends were always like doing stupid stunts, and the music kind of went hand in hand because like Jackass, CKY, they always had like really cool like punk rock metal stuff going, and
absolutely.
I discovered the band CKY, and to this day, Jess Margera is still one of my favorite drummers who's like a non-metal drummer. I just
Yeah.
really like his tasteful style. So I don't know, man. You just got to catch me. You never know what kind of mood you're going to catch me in as far as like what I'm harvesting my influence from, because I go through these phases and whatnot. But
Right.
definitely like in my early stages of metal, it would be, like I said, Shannon. Brondaler from Mastodon was a big one. I was big into Mastodon. Still one of my top three favorite bands of all time. New album's incredible. Jess Margera is a good one. I mean, as the years have went on, I've gotten, like I of course I've watched like Buddy Rich and all the OGs and the classics, but oh, man, it's going to be really hard for me to narrow down albums. So, The Bleeding by Cannibal Corpse,
Okay.
100% goes in that top five because that was my first introduction to like death metal, heavy, relentless pounding, kill your sister, rape your dog, whatever, shit. And I'll be honest, at first it was kind of almost like too much for me. It was like, because I was listening to like Metallica and Slayer, and then it's just like, it's like, whoa, back it up, Lawrence. But and I think the reason that I loved it so much was because everybody else that I showed it to fucking hated it. They all thought it was trash. Nobody got it, and I was like, "You guys are crazy. Just listen to
You
this.
guys
Like,
are
how does it
nuts.
not make you?"
This fire. Like,
Yeah. So, The Bleeding by Cannibal Corpse definitely in my top five most influential drumming albums, I guess. If we want to go a little further past that, I would say Nocturnal by Black Dahlia Murder is a good one.
mhm.
When I was in high school, I got super duper obsessed with a band called Atheists, and their drummer is like a fucking drum major at Berkeley or something. So like their shit was just insane. They were one of the first, I guess, tech death metal bands that I got into. Early
Mhm.
tech death before that term was really meant what it means today, I guess.
Right.
But it was like jazz, and like the bass player was insane. Like it was. So I would say Atheists, Unquestionable Presence, which I think is their second album, huge influence on my early days of drumming, because it was honestly, like, that album probably made me the most annoying fucking drummer to anybody that was jamming with me at the time. Because if you listen to that album, the drums are like nonstop, like his accents and fills. He's like a very jazzy, tasteful, like just balls to the wall, insane, filling as much space as I can,
Yeah.
So I tried to do that as a beginner. I was trying to like harvest that style, and everybody that I jammed with was like, dude, you're just doing too much. Like, you gotta stop. you gotta slow it down a
I'm
little
not
bit.
doing too much. You're doing too little. Like,
I mean, that was just, my adolescent brain telling me, like, fast, fill all the space, leave no
harder.
space.
Just fucking
You must hit
more.
at all times.
Yeah, just fucking
So
Kylo
what is
Ren.
that? Three?
More.
I got
Yeah,
two
it's
left,
3.
right?
Yes, sir.
Man. All right, I'm gonna try to get away from the death metal, because I mean the math. I don't think I listed off. Okay, so, man, 2 more albums.
If
Uh,
anything, do like one more album that you absolutely love, and the last one, your number one, that could be like a guilty pleasure music, like
okay,
record or something. Because I got into that because of a previous guitarist. I don't know if you're familiar with the band Party Cannon. Shout out to Mike once again.
absolutely.
Yeah. I had him on the podcast, him and Chris. Yeah, Mike and Chris. And he was like, "What's your guilty pleasure music?" And I was like, I have a playlist of anime openings, I guess." But like in reality, I didn't realize that the reason I was there that night is because Party Cannon, and it's just ruthless caveman IQ slam with like absolutely nonsensical but also non-gory, non-graphic lyrical content. I'm like, yeah, this is
Mhm.
my guilty pleasure because I'm all about lyrical depth. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
if anything, yeah, just give us another record that you would say either just really, really kept you driving forward and continued to motivate you as a drummer to do what you do now for the breathing process, kind of accumulating what you've culminated for the discography of the breathing process so far. Or just like, I can't ever listen to this record and not be impressed, like that type of thing.
So as far as like albums that directly influence the way I play in the breathing process, I don't know if there was really any drummer or style that I was like listening to outside of what we were writing to try and inspire myself, I guess, if that makes sense.
Right.
um I don't know, I don't really think about, like, when I'm writing a part, I don't really think about uh necessarily like, oh, I want this to sound like this band or this drummer. It just doesn't, I don't really know what my process is, but it's not really like that. So that's a tough one for me to answer in that
Mhm.
context. But I will say that I know I keep talking about Cannibal Corpse, but so The Bleeding was the first one, and Tomb of the Mutilated. The drums on that album really, I remember, like, blew me the fuck away. And this was when I was already kind of becoming more seasoned in death metal, and I'd already heard everything that was as gross as it could be. The
Yeah.
threshold uh, had been passed. But man, so what was that, 4?
Yeah,
Still
that
got
was
one.
4. And now
Okay,
if you
two
want to
Cannibal
just,
Corpse.
yeah, just like guilty pleasure shit or something like that, just to kind of
See,
throw your metal elitist
oh,
fans off.
I don't know if I'd call any of it a guilty pleasure, because I'm not really embarrassed about any of the goofy stuff I listen to.
Right.
I love it, and I don't care. Let's see, what's the goofiest? I mean, this isn't super uncommon among metal dudes. I actually, a lot of my metal friends are the same way, but we all love like the hardest, craziest death metal, and we really, really love techno, trance, dance, all of the above. I
Yeah.
love that shit.
Right.
Like, after about 2 or 3 beers, that's like my go-to. I don't put on the death metal. I put on the dance music, and I
Right.
jam. But man, I don't know. That's a
If not like a specific album, maybe just like a couple artists or something that are in the techno field. Because like
okay.
I
So
started
here,
out with EDM and techno. Like,
right. So when we go on our long drives after shows or on tours and things, we try to look up the most absurd music to just like keep us awake and help the driver. And we recently discovered this. I don't know if it's a band or just an artist, but it's called Only Fire.
Only
And
fire.
the album that we've been listening to is called Double Penetration. And I'm not going to go any further. I'm just going to let you discover it on your own as I did. But
That
the
sounds great.
vocals are all like speech to or text to speech. So it's like Microsoft Sam vocals over this absurd, and it's insane. Like the lyrics are they're like brilliant, but also could be written by like a creator as far as like the content and the absurdity of it.
It's fucking great. I can only imagine just like, you want to thrust it harder and harder. And it's just like,
It's literally, it's like that, but like you're not even going to be able to fathom how disgusting some of the lyrics are, but in the way.
Yeah, that can only be fire, a fucking dumpster fire musically. Just kidding. No, like that sounds great. Definitely something for me to check out.
Yeah,
Later
enjoy
tonight
yourself.
after session. Yeah, I will try to. And as we continue in our session and I finish, my Angry Orchard Peach Mango, because these things are actually pretty good. And me and Bryan both seem to have matching flags, which I think is pretty cool. It's the first time that's happened in session, actually. Um, we kind of wrap up the first segment of the Anatomy podcast, learning about Bryan's history as a musician, learning about his musical legacy, basically anything that he could offer as far as just, oh yeah, this is all about me today. So sit down, crack open a cold one, get some chips, enjoy. Now we kind of dive into the second segment, which is going to be music. And more specifically, because we've been talking quite a bit about music, we really are going from the point of him joining the breathing process, going forward, and kind of asking him like the interesting questions, and especially from the perspective of a drummer, because way too many people are way too used. They are like very nestled in the comfort zone of only asking the story of the frontman, the singer, the vocalist, because after all, the vocalist, he contributes to lyrics and stuff. If there is lyrical depth, that's where you pick the brain per se. But no, people, we're not about frontman syndrome here at Sean Cross or the Anatomy podcast. Fuck that shit. But also, we love you, Chris. So nothing against you, man. But
Chris
is amazing, really, really awesome guy, and it kind of feels like he's been a mentor to me when it's been applicable from a music business standpoint, and just like musician to musician, music enthusiast to music enthusiast. But Bryan, we continue off from the point of shit. You got Chris, and then the last guy, his name. What was the last guy's name? I do apologize. The last vocalist. Oh, I think your audio cut out, actually. Don't know what happened there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Okay.
So
yeah.
First joined the band, it was Cody.
Cody. Okay. So
yeah.
With Cody inviting you into the ranks of the breathing process a little bit beforehand to the Samsara. It's a very interesting word, tomato, as far as I'm concerned. But as he welcomed you into the ranks of the breathing process, you probably met Jordan and Sarah, who have been there since the beginning. And shout out to Sarah and, the rest of them, of course, but namely Sarah, because, was it okay? Here's the question to answer. That way I don't make myself look like a dumbass. The lineup that we know right now, other than Chris, because he joined right before you guys really geared up the Labyrinthian cycle. The lineup that we see now, has that been the lineup since Samsara and most of the records beforehand?
No. So Jordan's the only original member from the first record.
Right.
And beyond. So when I joined, it was Cody, Jordan, Sarah, and they didn't have a bass player at the time. And they had three guitar players. Ian was the third guitar player, and then I think I had maybe been to like two or three rehearsals, and then we got Jake on bass,
Okay.
and they weren't in the band for too long. I want to say maybe a year, if that, something like that.
Right.
But Ian, he lives in Worcester, so his commute was quite far. I think it
Right.
was like 6 hour drive or something like that for him to come to rehearsals and
Yeah.
such. Um,
So
that was
naturally, yeah.
pretty short lived. And Jake was a guitarist, like a very fantastic guitar player that was kind of like in my situation when I started playing drums. He was a guitarist that played bass. He wasn't really a bass player.
Right.
And I think that I, I think he enjoyed playing, he had a good time and he was a good bandmate. But I think deep down he just knew that he was a guitarist and not a bass player. And it was, in some ways it was really that simple. And I'm trying to think of where the lineup went from there. So Jake and Ian left. Then it was Cody left, and then we got Ben Marmarosa to fill in for a while. Which his band practiced down the hall from us in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. So that's how we got in touch with him. And I think the only reason that, because he was never going to be like a permanent member, he was just filling in because we had some dates to fill.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only reason he was in it for the month or several months that he was in the band. Because I know we did one tour it was supposed to be with Falsifier and
Yeah.
Born Anew, and I think there was another band that I can't remember. But it was like 2 days before that tour started, the drummer for Falsifier quit, so they weren't on that. But that was like I want to say it was like a 2 week thing to Florida and back, and he filled in for that. And then he did like a handful of other shows with us here and there. He was, like I said, he was never really in the band. And then we tried out a guy. I could be getting this wrong. I know we tried out a guy named Dylan, and we also tried out a guy named Trevor. I can't remember which one came first because they were very short lived. I think Trevor maybe played like 2 shows with us, and Dylan played 1 show maybe. And nothing against those guys at all. They were both like babies, you know what I mean? They were both like just starting out vocally. Not, I mean, that like just starting out in bands, that is, they were like, Trevor's a phenomenal vocalist. He does a lot of covers, has a ton of videos, but I don't think at that point he'd ever played any shows. I think the first show he played with us was one of the first shows, if not the first show that he ever played.
Wow.
So yeah, I can't remember, like I said, if Dylan or if Trevor came first. So fast forward a little bit, we had a tour with the Convalescents, and we had no vocalists. And we had played with Chris was in another band called Disillusion Effect at the time. It was a Morgantown band. And we had played with them, I want to say maybe 2-3 times, and we're like kind of band buddies or whatever, you know what I mean? We were acquaintances. And initially we asked Chris to fill in for that tour. He had very little time to prepare. I think he did 1 rehearsal with us, learned the set by himself, and then like just jumped right in there, and he nailed it, killed it completely, And after the tour, there was like some debate, like, because his style was a lot different from Cody, like exponentially different from Cody's. Cody was like the traditional deathcore Phil Bozeman. Chris was more like a Randy Blythe kind of.
Yeah, definitely Randy Blythe vibes.
Yeah, like more of a traditional, I guess, and not late 2000s deathcore or whatever. I don't know, however you want to categorize it.
Right, absolutely.
So after that tour, in my opinion, he nailed it. And I remember after we did that tour, people were like, dude, your vocal style with the black metal shit is like perfect. Like it's so much more fitting. I mean, yeah, it really does. And since then, I think like within the span of a year, he buckled down so hard and was like taking lessons, doing video lessons, um, practicing his balls off. And from that point to now, he has progressed. It's insane. Like if you go back and like watch the videos of, there's like one or two videos from that tour, the first tour he did with us out there, and he sounds phenomenal. But it's insane to see how far he's pushed himself, like just in the last couple of years. Like he's become a whole different animal, and I love it. It's awesome. He's still
Yeah.
got like that that really fit with that black metal, but he's exploring so much more, and he's got a lot of sauce going on. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. And I will say that among all of the other like black and death metal, black and deathcore bands in the scene that are slowly rising to the top, including the homies in Warm Shepherd, our buddies in Nithful, like some Disembodied Tyrant, with the return recently of Shrine, like so many bands, man, are rising up through the ranks, getting their proper, I think, assembly as far as like the podium is concerned. And the breathing process, I would say, is definitely at least up there, like just below Awakened Providence. But like other than that, they are still kind of godfathers in their own right to me, as far as black and death metal, black and deathcore. And I mean, shit, me and Derek of Nithful have been talking recently about, quote, Ignite the Church tour, which would be just a culmination of all these different bands in kind of the same similar category, but having all their own little like niche spices and devil in the details per se that help distinguish their band from the others. And I just continue daydreaming about that, man. Just Ignite the Church, just all these evil black and death metal bands just coming together as the brotherhood they are, and just unleashing hell upon the United States, and seeing where that goes. Like I don't know about you guys, for the audience that is tuning in now, but for those of you who have been checking out our episodes and to think that we've actually interviewed most of these bands now, which is also super crazy, like the possibilities are endless. And I think all we need is a backing from the good old Papa Jamie Graham himself, and then I think we can kind of get the gears turning for something like that. But it's still so cool to see how back during the Samsara, whatever cycle, because I love the record, but like I remember it's like, this is interesting, but it needs something a little bit more. And I think I was just obsessed with other bands at the time, so I didn't give that album the proper love it deserved. Still do. But thinking back on that now, it's crazy now, the bond that I have with you guys too. And I mean, kind of returning to your perspective and your contributions to this podcast, which have been absolutely phenomenal. And I do appreciate your time once again. As you guys were kind of just gearing through that cycle when you were first being introduced to the band and kind of leading up to what would be the Labyrinthian cycle, like, what do you think is like the biggest difference between you as a drummer then and you as a drummer now, even after Labyrinthian has been released?
I mean, I'm definitely a lot more seasoned now as far as touring and playing and all that goes. But I don't know. I think that not that I didn't already know this, but being around like we play with bands like Signs of the Swarm, Worm Shepherd, phenomenal bands with phenomenal musicians. It goes back to like what I was saying about that first drummer that I saw, like actually being on the road and seeing these monstrous players. It just makes me that much more hungry to. It's a competitive sport, but in a loving kind of way. You
In
know
a
what I mean?
very
I'm
good
never upset
sport
when
way.
I see a drummer that's better than me. I'm just like, holy shit, that's insane. I want that.
Yeah.
Go home and not. I'm gonna lock myself in my rehearsal room and not come out until I can play 300 beats per minute.
Yeah. Seriously,
So
it's
I
crazy.
think it's definitely made me a lot more self-aware and aware of my surroundings for sure.
Good,
That's
good.
the main thing.
Yeah. And like literally it's all about perspective for one, but two, just continuing to spread that perspective. Like just imagining your perspective as one eye, which is kind of the reason the logo is the way it is, people. Just a little background on that. but like basically the idea is as we continue to spread and continue to acquire perspective, just like more eyes just everywhere, eventually making it look like froth, just like bubbles and foam, just absolutely everywhere. Like that's the entire point, man. Is as you continue moving forward, just remember to stay humble, stay modest, and continue being open to absorbing new knowledge. Because then eventually, especially if you're trying to be a drummer, if you're trying to be a guitarist, a musician, someone who networks really well, which I've been learning about recently, that's how you get into a spot like Bryan here, playing in what I think is probably one of the coolest blackened death metal bands that I've really invested in recent times, alongside projects such as the Black Dahlia murder and plenty of other bands, just because I am hyper focused and almost obsessed with blackened deathcore specifically. So I don't really have that much input to offer upon just a lineup and variety of different black and death metal bands, but the breathing process kind of takes the cake as far as that. It might be a little bit biased, but I'm okay with that. So speaking and asking you as someone who is technically a multi-instrumentalist, I'm now curious on throughout your entry into the breathing process, being that you at least know a little bit about how to play guitar and play bass, even if it's been absolutely years since you've done it consistently, or at least that's the impression we've gotten tonight so far. When it comes to the breathing process, we know you're the drummer. We know you're the chop man. We know you bring the freaking Congo, man. But like every now and then, do you kind of help Jordan, Sarah, and Dan throw around various guitar riffs, or even every now and then there's a little twang for either anything on Samsara or anything on Labyrinthian? Maybe even now. Like, have you ever contributed riffs or little bass twangs to any of the breathing process?
So with Samsara, it was already written before I joined the band, and it was pretty much done. The only thing that I really did on, like, I kind of, there were some parts that I played slightly different in the songs, and we changed that. But as far as everything else, like, I kind of tried to just match what was going, what was already there. And like I said, I did put some of my flavor on the drums. But so for Labrynthian, all the drums were 100% written from the ground up. There might have been some things that because Jordan likes to he'll write riffs to like program drums just to get ideas, and by no means is he ever writing drums as like a final, like, this is what I want you to do. It's just like, this is a placeholder, you know. So I didn't write really, I didn't have as much of my flavor on Samsara, but the main riff in Wilt is actually one of my riffs that I wrote like years and years ago.
Really?
I never thought that it would make it on the record because it's such a doomy, like, in my mind, it didn't really fit with like the vibe, but it
Yeah.
was one of the more well-received songs. I mean, having David from Signs do a feature, I think, had a lot to do with that. But even live, like, it's people really vibe
It's
to that
such a
song.
fun song, man. It's so
Yeah,
fun.
so I wrote that main riff, like the da na na na, the whatever. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't think I wrote any other riffs for that. I might,
Right.
I mean, like, once in a while I'll throw around some ideas, but yeah, that one was all me, just that riff, and I think that's it on the last album.
Yeah, that's still really cool. And obviously I'm a sucker for a good doomy, just gloomy song. And really I think
I
that's
love those.
how, yeah, oh, it's so good. I still remember doing the reaction for that I did on my channel, and I'll go ahead and throw up a little thumbnail for everybody on the YouTube upload. That way you can go back in time to that. But that was the first reaction other than Lorna Shore where I actually felt myself expressing steam. I'm just like, oh, like I was ready to break out the shit in my room. And I think I even knocked over my camera, and Chris was like, I love that reaction, dude. We were all laughing over here. And I'm like, yeah. And that's really where it started. Is I think him and I were talking about the Under the Skin session, the track by track lyrical analysis session for Labyrinthian, and he mentioned that he was like, just like kind of looking back, and it's so funny to think back on that now, just how fucking heated I got in that moment when y'all faked out and brought another breakdown, made it even heavier, and then seeing that live, well, that was a treat to say the least. And it was cool to see Devin up there with you guys. And
Yeah, yeah,
hopefully next time that I see you guys live, and this is not like a call out at all. This is not like, oh, putting you on the spot, Chris, mainly. Um, but I definitely one day would love to have the opportunity to jump up and help y'all do Wilt, because it's such a fun fucking song.
yeah,
Um,
man.
but with that in mind, that is just speaking on behalf of the last two records from the breathing process that you have been a part of. Now,
Mhm.
I know you guys, obviously, this is a thing for all bands and all musicians. Like right after really you're done pushing the latest hit, the latest effort, you immediately get back to the grind.
Mhm.
So, with that in mind, I know you guys are working on new material.
Yeah.
I know Jordan posted about it on his Instagram, and then Chris was like, "Oh my God, they're in the studio, or like they're in rehearsal. This shit's sounding mean." So, with that same question in mind that I just asked, basically with this next record, whatever it happens to be, whether an EP or an album,
Mhm.
what are you planning to change about your creative contributions, if there is anything? Like, what do you want to do new with this record? And what are you absolutely determined to do different with this record?
So for me personally, I think we started to kind of dive into it a little bit on the last album. Um, there's like a couple of songs where I don't know if I'd call it progressive, but I tried to have a little more of a progressive approach to the drums versus just like endless double bass and blast beats.
Right.
And I don't want to get too crazy and jazzy, but I think I'm going to be a little bit more methodical with my accents and try to just be a little more tasteful, I guess.
Yeah. Sweet. And
Definitely gonna be, bringing the hammer. You know, I mean, I'm
bringing the hammer.
we we need just as many, if not more, blast beats as the last album. But I think I can. I don't know. I always strive to be a little more creative and not regurgitate the same thing over and over again. But at the same time, you know, when you play a genre of music, there are obvious aesthetics that you want to try and
Sustain.
yeah, yeah. So, you can expect more of the same, but better, I guess.
Yeah.
And maybe a little more creative.
Yeah, there you go. A little bit like just, more variety and stuff is and that's like very important when it comes to being an artist in any field, is just understanding what worked, what made you happy, what made the audience happy, which is that previous statement. It worked. Wow. The ratings, the streams, everything. And that's just speaking from a business side. Um, but yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, shit, obviously with me feeling like I am on the level with you guys as I feel like I am so incredibly excited already for the breathing process. And I mean, obviously, you guys signing to Unique Leader Records earlier last year, right? A little bit before Labyrinthian. It was like during the summer, right?
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, during the summer. Okay. So like with you guys signing during the summer, which I still remember that post, and I remember what the hell is this logo? This is gorgeous. And now we use that for all the thumbnails having to do with the breathing process. Uh I am more than excited. I hope you guys are as well, as we slowly and kind of just relaxed in a way. Right now we're on the beach, we're enjoying I'm fucking for me it's Angry Orchard apparently. We're enjoying an ice cold Angry Orchard, just sipping on it with glasses on and just like the sun overhead. We're this is like the summer vacation of the creative process for the breathing process as they gear up for their next album. I hope that wasn't a confusing an analogy, because I was supposed to be very just like, whoa,
Very,
I can
very,
I can
very.
I can
I
see
feel
where he is, man. Like, but as you know, as they gear up for their next release, well, I will be poking right behind them, just like, hey, when are you gonna release new shit? Like, we need the details, people. They deserve the answers. What tell us what we need to know. Like, it's gonna be a journey. It's gonna be a ride. And now with technically part 3, but officially part 2 of the Anatomy podcast, the breathing process edition. Bryan, thank you again for what I think is now close to 2 hours of your time out of your day. Wow. Also with apparently a small time difference, not too bad. Not like you're in Czechoslovakia, so it was like, hey, yeah, it's 2 a.m. over here. Like
6:59 right now.
6:59. Okay, so yeah, we actually didn't do that bad. We managed to compact it to at least 2 hours. We learned so much about Bryan tonight. For some people, it's like, oh my God, I know too much. I just wanted to know about the music. Like, no, that's not why you're here. That's not why we do this. It's okay. It's okay. Breathe. But we learned plenty about Bryan's story. We learned about his creative contributions to the breathing process, his legacy thus far. We managed to pluck 5 albums off of him, including what I would say is kind of a guilty pleasure for metal elitists. Just like, oh, he doesn't actually listen to metal exclusively. Whoa. Like, no.
There's nothing guilty about me, man.
There's nothing guilty. There's no sin to atone for, people. That's just being a musician. And, you know, and a freaking metal musician without, you know, it's all about the metal. Oh, like, no, it's not about that. You're just like, relax. It's okay. Again. But this has been the Anatomy Podcast, episode 29, which is crazy because the episode that we did with Jordan was episode 9. So 20 episodes later, people, we are still covering the story, the legacy, the history of each of the members from the breathing process. But I hope you guys enjoyed. And I mean, Bryan, is there anything else you were wanting to plug or mention before we wrap up session for tonight?
Well, as you guys know, Breathing Process has a new album out, of course. I also play in another band called Crown Vic. We just put out a couple of singles, and I think we're gonna put out another one pretty soon. And that's really all I got going on. I mean, I record from home, so if anybody needs some drums, send me some guitars, and I'll put drums on them, and you can give me money for it.
Pay Bryan money for drums. That's what he's trying to say.
Pay me to beat my meat on your songs.
All right. That's a great way to end it. Thank you, Bryan, for your time. And ladies and gentlemen, be sure to enjoy your night. Stay tuned for episode 30 of the Anatomy Podcast with, well, we're not even going to say just for now. I think you guys are going to like it, though. Have a good night.